on the one
Yeah.
hand, with David, there's a view which we can get into. We've started to touch on it a little bit, where there's like these base primal desires that we have
Mhm.
that maybe that speaks exactly as you're saying, that part of us where it's like we can't even control it. And that's
Yeah.
part of what trying to love God is the way you stated is just trying to control that, to
Yeah.
understand that it can lead to harm and we can't, as hard as it is, as impossible as it feels at times, we can't do that. So there's that category. Then there's the other category, more you're talking about with Paul and even the Crusades and those things, where there's this sentiment of I'm protecting God. I'm doing this in honor of God. And that one is interesting to me because I'm curious, just
Yeah.
given your expertise in this area, I would imagine that's rooted in, and I don't know if God said this directly in scripture or not, but this idea that there is an enemy, right? Because when we tell the story of
Mhm.
Jesus, it's love everybody, everybody's welcome in. But then there's also this concept of the devil and evil being out there. And that would
Yeah.
seem to have opened the door for people to take this stance of, I can go murder those people or hurt those
Yeah.
people because I need to protect against this evil.
Yeah.
Was that a mistake that was made? I'm not going to say
It,
God made a mistake.
yeah.
How did that come out? How did that allow for itself?
The big problem is we kind of jumped too far ahead,
Mm.
right? So yes, scripture does talk about these ideas of good and evil. I do think historically we have misunderstood those in a lot of ways. But even if you take that as, let's just say there is a good and an evil, the thing that we're jumping over is what is our response to that? Because our gut response is what we've been trained in ever, as long as stories have been told, and for us, as long as movies and shows have been made, there is a hero and a villain. The villain's always bad and the hero is always good. And the goal is you have to defeat the villain. Now it's really interesting. I feel like there are more shows now that are starting to step back from that
Yeah.
and kind of blur it a little bit. And it kind of captures us because it's actually more realistic.
Mhm.
Because it's rare that you have somebody that is just utterly evil and villainous. And then it's rare that you have somebody just utterly good and perfect, right? And so the reality is it's this blurrier thing, but we still have this notion that if something's bad, I have to get rid of it. I have to destroy it. I have to fight against it. Scripture is filled with battle terminology, things like that. But I think there are many who have latched onto that for whatever reasons. Sometimes they're not good reasons. Sometimes it makes us feel good to be the aggressors. Sometimes it's we're we're afraid, and so like that makes us feel stronger or safer. So I think there's a lot of people making the decision to fight for God that it's not actually about God. Um, but if we, as if Christians actually stopped for a moment and asked that question of what does the Bible say our response to evil should be, I think it would catch us off guard because, uh, take for example, a lot of people will pull the passage of the armor of God, and it's talking about suiting up with the helmet of salvation and the breastplate of righteousness and the sword of the Spirit. And the hilarious thing is all of those except for the sword are real defensive things,
Mm.
right? The sword is the only aggressive one, but the way that it's described, especially elsewhere in scripture, is not in a aggressive stab someone kind of a way. um, and so already in that, there's this idea that it's not about being the aggressor, but it goes even further. It says once you get suited up, it says when it talks, I wish I had it memorized, but when it talks about standing against evil, it actually talks about standing.
Mm.
And then it says when you've done all else to continue to stand. So again, it's not a fight and tear it down and cut it up. It's like stand firm.
Mm.
Uh, Fast forward to Revelation. Another thing that people will point to and say, therefore, we have like this is starting to happen. So we need to fight for God. Well, you know what the believers in Revelation are typically doing? Standing and singing and getting slaughtered. Like that's how Revelation describes it. I don't see anything in there of like the people of God being the ones to wage war. There is a point where it talks about the lamb and the angels, but even in that, like it talks about, to those who are to be taken captive, be taken captive, and those who are to be slain, be slain. It's like not an invitation to fight. Go back to the Apostle Paul. He knows like the threat against Christians because he was the threat. How does he respond when evil is actually coming at him? He gets beaten and flogged and left for dead and imprisoned and eventually martyred. The majority of the disciples martyred, right? And so any Christian that is taking up this stance that I have to fight for God, it's hard for me to find a spiritual backing for that. Now, easy for me to find a spiritual backing for a seemingly counterintuitive opposite response. And there is one more thing, and it's gone. It'll come back if it's
It's all
important.
right. It's the perfect timing for it because I was going to ask. So,
Thank goodness.
is it fair, based on your understanding, based on your beliefs, that because a lot of people would reference, and again, I'm by no means expert on it, I've read it, but just
Mm-hmm.
the Old Testament in general, that God seemingly was more violent, more rageful, the flood, the all different things in which things were done. Is the view that that was a misinterpretation and that actually wasn't the
Mm.
case? Or is the view, and I say this with full respect, that God evolved and the God of the Old
Yeah, yeah.
Testament is an evolved God in the New Testament who recognized maybe some problems with that?